Leslie can introduce herself as well, but I am Rob Lewis. I am a financial coach. I'm pretty sure all of you guys are in New York, and I actually know all of you. That's hilarious. So you guys got to know about me. You may not know my story too much. I'll go a little bit more in depth with that in a second. But really, Leslie and I just came together because we wanted to give you guys about 45 minutes to maybe an hour tops of really just value when it comes to planning your finances for your kids. A lot of this stuff is probably stuff that you wish you would have learned in high school and in college. And honestly, you probably could have learned in high school and in college. It's just not readily available information. But I am excited to be able to share that with you guys. So Leslie, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get things rolling.
All right. Hi, guys. So I'm Leslie Sultan. I'm an estate planning attorney, and it's a pleasure to be here with Rob and apparently all his people. Yeah, nice to meet you guys. And I'll speak after Rob. And for those who weren't on earlier, this is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can turn your camera off. And yeah, so my focus is on estate planning for parents of minor children, because we are actually the most vulnerable when it comes to estate planning or not planning. So I'll get into all that later, but Rob's got a great presentation for you guys. So take it away, Rob.
All right. Thank you very much. Awesome. So let me share my screen with you guys so you can see what I see. I'm going to set my timer so that I make sure I don't go on for too long, because although I love hearing the sound of my own voice, I'm sure you guys don't like it as much as I do. But I'll give you guys a little bit about my background. So I've been in financial services for about 3.5 years now, and my background is actually in mechanical engineering, funny enough. So I had the opportunity to work in finance my junior year of finishing up my degree. I'd actually lost my part-time job, funny enough, and that led to this. And really, it was as simple as me calling up, the advisor or the coach I was working with, telling them I had no money to invest, and them giving me the opportunity to work with them part-time. I didn't realize that was an option. I thought you had to go and get a degree for it. I was not about to go back and undo 3 years of schooling. So the fact that I didn't have to do that was very attractive to me. I really just wanted to learn about this stuff. I'm sure you guys can attest that there's no how-to money class, but it'd be really nice if there was one. And I kind of viewed this as one. If I could learn more about finances personally, that's fantastic. If I could help some people along the way, that's even better. And if I can make some money doing it, well, that's not a bad thing either. And 3.5 years later, here I am. I love what I get to do. I love being able to share this with people. And even more than that, I love being able to help people implement this, because I always say that knowledge is power, but applied knowledge is priceless. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do anything with what we know, it doesn't really do us much good. So what we're going to be going through today is going to be more specialized on estate planning and financial planning for minors. That's not to say that you can't apply this to pretty much any area of your life, to be honest, but that's really what the main focus is going to be. And I think that you really have to focus on life insurance first and foremost when it comes to planning for your kids, because let's think about it. How much is our car worth? Probably $20,000 to $40,000. If you have a really nice car, maybe 60 to 80,000. Do you insure it? Well, yeah, you have to legally to be able to drive it. You have to. I actually just got my car insurance today. I had to renew it. How much is your house worth? Maybe $300,000, $400,000, $600,000. Again, not insignificant, and you wouldn't want to have to pay that money out of pocket, so we insure it. And how much is your life worth then? Probably a lot more than your house or your car. So can we really not afford to insure our life? Probably not. And you may not have heard this before. I'm going to explain to you the way it was explained to me, the main purpose for life insurance, just because a lot of people think that it's just for final expenses. It's to put me in the ground and make sure my family doesn't have to worry about it. Some people think it's to make their families rich after they die. And while it can do both of those things, that's not necessarily the purpose of it. Really, life insurance is income protection. That's the biggest reason to have it. So let's say we've got this family over here on the left-hand side. We've got mom, we've got dad. Let's say both of them make $5,000 a month. We add that up. That's $10,000 a month they're making. Say their expenses are $8,000 a month. They're looking pretty good. They've got $2,000 a month left over. But if at any point dad passes away, his income also passes away. What does that mean? Now, mom has $5,000 of income coming in. Dad's $5,000 is no longer there, but they still have $8,000 worth of bills. So either they're going to have to sacrifice something from their daily lives, which may mean downsizing the house, or maybe selling the car, maybe moving their daughter from a private school to a public school, or maybe even moving altogether to a different state. And a lot of things that they wouldn't have to do if they just had income replacement, aka life insurance. That's really what's most paramount. So can you have life insurance on your kids? Yes, you can, but believe it or not, I actually don't recommend whole life insurance or permanent life insurance. I'm going to explain why, based off of what we just said about the reason for life insurance. So in the early years, that's really when you need life insurance. If we look at this red line over here, this can be indicative of your financial responsibility. And early on, you have young kids. You've got high debt. You've got a mortgage you're probably paying off. At that point, if you lost your income, in other words, if you stopped living, which is not fun, your income would have to be replaced. That's a big need at that point. But later on, you're going to have more money saved. And you're really not going to have a very high financial need because your kids are going to be growing out of the house. If they're not out of the house, they're going to be lovingly kicked out of the house. You're going to have a lot lower debt at that point. The mortgage is going to be close to paid off, if not paid off. So at that point, you don't actually really need life insurance. You need money to live off of. So let's say, again, same husband and wife, now they're all grown up. Let's say they need $1 million to retire. If that's enough for two people to be able to retire on and one person passes away at that point, don't you think the remaining spouse is going to find a way to live off $1 million? If it was already enough for two people, now there's only one left. They'll probably want to manage, right? That's called being self-insured. And that's really what we want to help people do, or really what I help people do. And Leslie, obviously, as well, through estate planning, she helps people in a fantastic way. But really, I want to make sure that you have insurance during the time that you need it and that you can save up money for the time that you don't. And really, the insurance I would recommend, if you do get life insurance, please get life insurance, is term insurance. All of the experts recommended it. I'll leave this up here so you guys can read through this real quick. But for 99% of the population, term insurance is the cheapest and, to be honest, the easiest way to go, especially if you get it while you're younger. Oh my goodness, if you get it while you're younger, you'll be set. But even if you don't, it's still going to be cheaper than not getting it at all. Now, can you get life insurance on your kids? I'll go back to the original question I asked. Yes, you can. I would recommend doing it as a child rider for a couple of reasons. One is going to be actually cheaper than getting a whole life insurance policy in general, but they're still going to have coverage. The nice thing is with the child rider, you can actually have up to $50,000 of coverage on a child. You don't really need more than that just because kids are much less likely to die than adults. And also, there's not really a big insurable interest there. Most people aren't living off of their children when they're 5 years old. It doesn't really work that way. And the nice thing is they still get the option to actually convert that policy into their own when they're of age. So they can do it as early as 18 or as late as 25. But let's say, I'll give you a real world example. A friend of mine he's actually a year older than me. He's 25. So this year he'd be able to convert if he wanted to. But he has type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed when he was 7 years old. That's not necessarily something that he can really control. It's, genetic. It runs in his family. And unfortunately, he's declared uninsurable. So if he had a child rider, he would actually still be able to have a policy at age 25 and convert that into his own, regardless of his own health conditions. The same would apply to actually my sister. She actually had cancer of her kidneys when she was 2 years old. And, they really don't insure cancer patients that much. I don't know why. Apparently it's a health risk or something like that. She's much better now. Obviously, she's 29 years old. She's doing very fine. But if she was uninsurable, that would have been another option for her to be able to convert that into her own policy to still have that coverage. So that would be a great situation to have life insurance on your kids in the form of a child rider. The nice thing too is it actually covers all of your children. So you don't have to get a separate one for each child. So now we'll jump into actually setting an example for your kids. How can they actually save money? Because we want to make sure that they're building good money habits. Believe it or not, it doesn't start with them. It actually starts with you. So first and foremost, you want to make sure you're modeling the attitudes that you want your kids to have towards money. At the end of the day, let's be honest, kids see a little bit more than we think they do. They hear a little bit more than they think we do. So we have to model the actions that we want them to see all day, every day until they're asleep. And even maybe after that, they might still have their ears open for a little bit. Emphasize the value of money. Make sure it's not just some abstract thing. Money doesn't just grow on trees. It'd be nice if it did, but it doesn't, unfortunately. Make sure you're paying yourself first. If you're not really sure what that means, but you may have heard it before, it basically just means the same way that when you get your paycheck on Friday and you get mad that your bills got paid, pay yourself first as well. It could be as simple as setting aside a fixed amount each paycheck, maybe, $100 or $200 a paycheck, or it could be a fixed percentage if you like that a little bit better, maybe 10% or 15% of your paycheck. But make sure that's going directly towards paying yourself first, saving that money. And then at that point, you can decide, all right, maybe out of that $100, 50 goes towards an emergency fund, 50 goes towards investing. That's when you have a little bit more play. But make sure you're setting aside something for yourself. That's definitely important. Get your own debt under control. That one's kind of self-explanatory. I won't put too much in debt with that. Be in the habit of giving. I think it's easy to be a cheerful giver when you see other people being generous. If they see you hoarding money, guess what they're going to be more likely to do? The same thing. And speak openly about money with your kids. Make sure that you're having money conversations with them. This shouldn't be a taboo topic. It should be something that they're comfortable coming to you with. And you should be comfortable answering these questions or telling them, you know what, honey, I actually really don't know, but let's go find out the answer. And lastly, keep your priorities straight. Let's keep the main thing the main thing. So, budget basics, wants versus needs. This is huge. If you can help your kids understand the difference between needs and wants, that's really how you discover and how you develop money savvy kids. I'll be honest with you. So let them understand that, yes, you can spend money on the things that you want, but make sure you're handling the things that you need first. Again, that's keeping your priorities straight. In other words, keeping the main thing the main thing. If they see you always behind on bills, but you've always got the newest Gucci bag or the nicest shoes and whatnot, you might be sending the wrong message to your kids. You might be sending the wrong message to them. So the best place to start for them, to be honest, is having money of their own. So what's a good way to do that? An allowance is fantastic, especially if your kids are younger. It can be for household chores, or it could just be a set amount each week. It's up to you. Some people don't like giving money for chores because they want them to just develop the responsibility of doing those regardless. That's fantastic. I respect that. Some people say, you know what, assigning a dollar value to that is a nice way to get them paid and also get that done. I respect that as well. Whatever ideology you feel works best for your kids, go for it. You know them better than I do. Periodic jobs works better when they get a little older. They can mow lawns, they can babysit, they can shovel the snow. If you're somewhere with snow, Alicia, I know you don't have to worry about that too much, so they may be shoveling sand down there, but the concept still applies. And other money too. It could be birthday money. It could just be special events, maybe when they graduate. Definitely set aside a portion of that to savings because they'll blow through it if you don't. But give them an opportunity to use a portion of it and say, okay, you made $1,000 for your birthday. I'm going to give you $300. What would you like to use that money for? Why are we going to do that? So that they have experience with sums of money. So allowance basics. Here's an easy way to just create a really simple allowance system for your family. This is more of a guideline than strict rules. So feel free to manipulate this as you want. But I think picking a payday and sticking to it will make it as realistic as you can to the real world. I mean, everybody gets paid on a specific day of the week. If you're an employee, if you're a business owner, it's a little bit more regular, but if you're a W-2 employee, when payday comes around, maybe you check your phone at Friday at 3 a.m. because that ADP is going to be dropping that check in there. I remember from my days at TJ Maxx and Models, that's exactly how it was. So with younger kids, focus a little bit more on a weekly allowance, whereas teens can actually develop budgeting skills with a monthly amount. The main reason for that is the younger the kids are, the shorter the attention span is. Let's be honest. If you give them, $25 for the month, they're going to forget they've got the $25 for the entire month. The second day, they're going to blow it all on something they really didn't need, and it's not going to have the impact that you want to. Give them weekly amounts. And also, they're younger children. What do they need, $50, $100 for? They're not going to be spending on anything useful at that point. And make sure you decide beforehand, what is that money going to cover? Is this going to cover lunch at school? If they have pizza day Fridays, hey, I'm not going to pay for that. But if you'd like to, you can use some of your allowance towards that. Is it going to go towards clothes above and beyond, just the basics of what they have on their backs? Hey, if you sold that new pair of shoes you want, no problem, but you're going to have to pay for that. Make sure whatever it is for you, you just clearly delineate that so that there's no gray area there. So that way nobody's feelings gets hurt, both yours and your children. Give your younger kids an allowance in smaller denominations. Again, it gives them a more tangible feel towards that money. It also gives them less money overall to spend. They really don't need a lot of money at that age, and it helps them understand the value a lot more of both giving and spending. Just giving them a $10 bill versus giving them 10 $1 bills really helps conceptualize that a lot more. Offer guidance to them, but ultimately, remember, it is their money. Let them decide how they want to handle it. And when they do make money mistakes, use that as a learning opportunity instead of just an opportunity to reprimand. I think it's very easy to turn a learning opportunity into something of, frustration because you want them to do obviously better than we did with our money. And it's easy to turn that into a situation that maybe we don't, but just remember, they're young, they're learning. You want them to make mistakes now with you so that when they're on their own, they don't have to worry about that. And kids in business, I'm going to skim through these slides really quick, but basically, if you have kids that have, an entrepreneurial bone in their body, I would recommend padding their bank account by doing different chores and whatnot like this. And this is where you can actually get into contributing to accounts like a minor Roth IRA. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But feel free, if your kids are of age where they can go out and make some money doing odd jobs, one, it keeps them busy. And two, it also stimulates the mind a little bit so that as they're going through school, you can figure out, hey, do you really want to go to college or do you want to go into the workforce and eventually develop your own business for yourself? I probably could have saved my parents a lot of money if I figured that out before finishing my degree, but here we are. And now we'll break down credit and investing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about credit, then we'll shift over to kind of part 3 where I talk about how you can save money for your kids. But this is still an education for them. Learning how to handle credit wisely now, I think, is really important so that they don't get into debt later on. So let them see you use cash sometimes, even if it's a small amount of cash. It lets them know that the credit card or the debit card, it's not just invisible. It's not just free money, because that's the biggest misconception we can have. Credit is a privilege. It's not a right. It's not something they have to have. And let them know that as well. You want them to develop good credit. You can potentially add them as a an authorized user on your credit cards. Nothing wrong with that. But I would start them out with something like a secured card, and then have them build the credit from there. And also, again, help them realize that this is tangible, real money. This isn't just free money we're using here. Good way of doing that. Let's say, they want to buy a tablet. Oh, I wonder what kind of tablet, maybe an iPad or something like that. Say it's $300 and the APR, or the annual percentage rate, is 16%. If they paid $25 a month towards that, they'd actually pay almost $30 in interest, which is almost 10% more. So significant. Turn that into a $3,000 purchase. Now you're looking at $300 worth of interest, just interest that they're paying. So help them understand that at an early age, so that way they don't ever have to worry about getting into credit card debt. And now we'll jump into my personal favorite, the investing side of things. So when it comes to saving for your kids, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but conceptually, I think it's good to understand the background behind investing first. So compound interest, and this is really just explaining how compound interest works. So if you haven't heard of the rule of 72, I guarantee you, if you only remember this from what I'm talking about, you will be smarter than 95% of the people that you come in contact with, and they'll think you're some sort of financial guru. But basically how it works is you take 72, you divide it by whatever interest rate you're looking at, and it tells you how long your money is going to take to double. Let's say that Alicia, for example, I'm going to pick on you just because I can see it on my screen. Let's say when you were born, mom and dad set aside $10,000 for you. They did it in an account earning 3%. Let's say for Ophelia, they put it in an account earning 6%. And then who else have we got on here? Let's say for you, Corey, your parents put it in an account earning 12%. So for you, Alicia, 72 divided by 3 gives us 24, which means your money doubles every 24 years. I apologize for the funky looking numbers, but that's $20,000 over there. And at age 48, now you've got $40,000. Not bad, but also not amazing. You know, you didn't have to work for the money, but it's also not a lot of money. Now let's look at Ophelia. She's at 6%, double the interest rate, doubles in half the time. But you can see she ends up with more than double the money, 160,000 to your 40,000. And then we've got Corey all the way at the end over here at 12%. And she's doubling again in half the time that you are. So you doubled 72 divided by 6 every 12 years. She doubled 72 divided by 12 every 6 years. And she actually has $2.5 million at the end. So same time period, same starting amount. The only difference was where we put that money. So paying attention to the interest rates on the accounts of where you have your children's money is very, very important, because this is the impact it can have over a long period of time, even over a shorter period of time. I mean, even if you only look at 12 years, would you rather $10,000 somewhere in between there, 20,000 or 40,000? Super simple. So when it comes to types of accounts, these are really the 3 main types. And this applies honestly to us as adults as well. First and foremost, you want to have something like an emergency fund, or in this case, an immediate fund. This is typically for expenses that are going to be in less than a year. But if it's an emergency fund, it's just for expenses that could happen in less than a year. I can guarantee you emergencies are going to happen when you least expect it, when you don't want them to happen. So having money set aside for that usually helps with those. Then we've got our short-term or our mid-term account. That's usually for things about 1 to 5 years. I usually say about 3 to 5 years, to be honest, in the future. That could be things like maybe buying your first car, potentially put down payment on your first house. Things like that can kind of fall into that category. Even potentially saving for college if it is a shorter time frame. But if it's a longer time frame, say 5+ years, that's when we can consider longer term investments. So stuff like retirement, stuff like education for your kids if they're under the age of 13. That's definitely a long-term investment, and that's when we can use different vehicles for growth. Speaking of which, what the heck are the different investment options that are out there? There is a lot of them. I'm just going to go through these ones shortly and then explain to you which one that I actually started using when I was 19, when I was a kid. This is what my parents used for me. And actually, I think I was 10 years old when they opened my first account for me. That's what they use. But we've got CDs, just a certificate of deposit. I joke around and call them certificates of depreciation just because they don't really earn a lot of interest on the long term. But essentially, they're FDIC insured. You can get them through any bank or credit union. Bonds are super simple. If you don't know what a bond is, it's essentially just a loan. So let's say, for government bonds, for example, the government has money they'd like to put towards something. They don't have that money, so they issue a bond. You give them your money, they use it. They pay you an interest rate or a coupon rate back. That's kind of how bonds work. Corporate bonds are pretty much the exact same thing. They're just corporate companies. So they're considered less safe than the U.S. government. Walmart is more likely to fail than the entire U.S. government. But again, still a relatively safe company. Mutual funds, I'm actually going to explain those in the next slide, so I won't go too much in depth. And then collectibles, those are fun, but there's no real value in there. So nowadays, I think kids are collecting like Funko Pops and whatnot. I have a friend of mine who has way too many of them, probably several $1,000s worth of them. Some of them have appreciated in value, but most of them have not. So yeah, that's exactly what collectibles are. They're fun, if it's a hobby, by all means, but don't count on that. And when it comes to actually investing, minors cannot open accounts by themselves, but you can do it for them. And the options that you have for them are primarily 4. There's probably more out there, but these are the 4 basic ones. The first one would be a traditional brokerage account. That's just really a regular investment account. You can put pretty much anything in there, and there's no real tax benefits to it. Second one would be a minor Roth IRA or custodial Roth IRA. It functions similar to how a Roth IRA works in that you have to have earned income to be able to contribute, but you can really be any age. So you say you have a child actor who's a baby, but they make money, and you contribute to a Roth IRA, funny enough. Thirdly is going to be a UTMA or a UGMA. That stands for Uniform Transfer to Minors Act or Uniform Gift to Minors Act. There's slight differences between them, but for the purpose of this, you can consider them essentially the same in how they'd function for how you save for your kids. There's no limit on how much you can contribute to those. There is a limit in a Roth IRA. And they give you a little bit more flexibility on what to use that money on. But it is a custodial account that they will take access of when they reach the age of majority, which is either 18 or 21, depending on the state you're in. So just keep that in mind. All of those other accounts, including the last one I'm going to name for you, you have full control over the entire time. This one, the UTMA or UGMA, your children will take advantage of when they're 18 or 21. So as long as you're okay with them taking advantage of that money when they're of that age, you think they'll be financially responsible, by all means, go for it. If not, that's when you might want to look into other options. And the last one, which is the, I guess, most friendly from a tax benefit standpoint, would be a 529 plan. Those allow you to contribute tax deferred. Tax deferred just means you don't pay taxes on it now. You can potentially get a state tax deduction, but not a federal tax deduction, unfortunately. Uncle Sam likes you, but he doesn't like you that much. And if you use that money for what's called qualified expenses, I won't go through exactly what those are today, but think about things like tuition, books, things like that. That's what you can use that money for. And the nice thing is, over the last few years, they've actually opened that up to K through 12 education as well as college education. So you can use it for your younger children as well. And there are a lot of benefits to that one. But I'm at about 19 minutes. I think I'm going to stop it there. And if you guys do have questions on, what a mutual fund is, if you want to look at, I can explain this slide for you towards the end, but I think I'm going to end there to be respectful of Leslie's time. So that's all I've got for you right now, guys.
Got to unmute myself. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much, Rob. I definitely learned a lot. I have 2 kids, 6 and 8. So yeah, that was some good tips. I really appreciate you breaking all those little things down for us. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. I don't know if anybody needs a quick little stretch before I start. I can take a minute, water break. I'm going into the next topic. All right, so as you know, Rob just did all the financial planning with some really key tips. Hopefully some of you took notes, but I don't think you did because he explained it really well. And I'm going to go into the estate planning side. Just a little legal disclaimer that the contents of this presentation, as well as any answers discussed during the Q&A, are just general legal information only and should not be construed as legal advice. For help with any specific legal situation, please consult with a licensed attorney. With that said, I'm happy to take questions and answer some general questions at the end, and hopefully help you out if you have any specific questions. So again, I'm Leslie Salton. I'm a working mom with 2 kids. I've had my own business since 2010, and we try to give a personal approach to all of our cases that we work on. So I think the best way to start when we talk about estate planning is to begin with probate. Some of you may have heard of it. Basically, you want to avoid probate. So what is probate? I'll just go back. So probate is the legal process that a family has to go through when somebody dies. So we call it probate because you're probating the will, you're admitting it for probate, which means basically a will has to be validated by a court in order for it to be, valid and for someone to take it to the bank and say, hey, I want my money. Otherwise, if you walk into a bank with a will, they're going to say, how do we know you didn't just go write that up next door and get some witnesses and, are stealing somebody's money. I also use the word probate for when someone doesn't have a will, although technically that's called an administration. So with or without a will, you wind up in court having, the family has to wind up in court in order to get access to the estate of the person who died. Unfortunately, in New York, probate takes a very long time. So depending on which county, it may be faster than others. I'll tell you, Brooklyn, Kings County is the slowest. It's the worst. I have cases there are pending for years there. On average, a good case in a good county might take 6 months. And keep in mind, like during that time, you have no access to the money or the funds. And so the family is paying out of their own pocket to maintain the assets, or, if there's a house, paying the mortgage, paying legal fees, etc., until they can get that resolved. Now, anything that's less than $50,000, if the total value of the estate is less than $50,000, that's called a small estate in New York. That's a lot faster. And that's, can be quicker. It costs a lot less money. But, fortunately or unfortunately, most people don't die with only 50,000. So we're mostly dealing with larger estates, and hopefully you are all on your way to having 50,000 or more in your estate. In terms of cost to the family, you're looking at filing fees with the court. So for example, the average person has a house that's more than $500,000. That automatically puts them in the top tier of filing, and the court fee is $1,250. That's just to file the case. Okay, that doesn't include the legal fees, any funeral costs, etc. Attorneys generally take a retainer. We take a $5,000 retainer and we bill it an hourly rate. Some attorneys, they'll get situations where the family doesn't have the money to pay. They need the access to the money. And so the attorney will say, well, since I have to do all the work without getting paid, I'm going to take a percentage of the estate. And that's to be negotiated with the attorney. Some can charge, for example, 5%. Let's say 5% of $1 million estate means that attorney's walking away with $50,000. That's $50,000 less of that person's hard-earned money that's not going to the family. It's going to the attorney, paying for that attorney's kids' college funds. So we want to try to avoid probate, obviously, at all costs. We've seen also instances where the attorneys will take 1/3 of the estate. So that's a substantial amount as well. So what if I don't have a will? Unfortunately, a large percentage of people do not have wills. If you don't have a will, the state that you live in has a plan for you. So in the state of New York, there's like a table. So if I'm married, my spouse gets everything. If I'm not married but I have children, my children get everything. If I'm married and have children, my spouse gets a percentage and my children get a percentage. So it's all broken down very specific. If no children, no spouse, it goes to parents. If no parents, to siblings, to no siblings, to nieces and nephews. So there's a tier. And unfortunately, this can get complicated with the courts. This is what slows things down. You have to be able to prove how you're related. And usually there's a bond required. So on top of paying for the filing fees, on top of hiring an attorney, the court's saying, we don't know if we can trust you with the money. So you have to pay a bond. I mean, it gets really ridiculous. It's kind of intense. And again, unfortunately, during that process, nobody has access to the funds until somebody is appointed by the court. And then sometimes they even need permission to get access to the assets. Some people say, well, if I have a will, can I avoid probate? Nah. No, as I mentioned before, a will has to be validated through the courts. A judge has to confirm that it was properly signed, properly witnessed, etc. Again, no assets can be transferred. If, we see a lot of people who have a house with rental income, no rent can be collected. You can't evict the tenants if they're not paying. No expenses like funeral expenses can be reimbursed. It can get very costly for the family. Again, once somebody is appointed as the executor, if there's a will, then they can start taking legal action. But until then, it gets complicated. And even with a will, let's say somebody says, well, I want to leave everything to my daughter, but my son hasn't talked to me in 20 years. I'm leaving him out. He still has to get notice of the court appointment and has an opportunity to dispute that will. So court really just creates a lot of conflict and delays. So how do I avoid probate? A beautiful question. And the answer is a revocable trust. So many of you may have heard of trust, and so I'm going to explain that a little bit and then why it's really helpful for minors. So a trust is basically a contract with yourself for your estate where you appoint somebody to manage your assets when you pass away. And while you're alive, you can be the trustee. So it's a really beautiful tool. Essentially, it was developed, by the uber rich back in the days. They hired all these fancy lawyers to go and challenge the IRS and the codes and the courts, and they've carved out these rules for a trust. And now we, through the use of the internet, all attorneys have access to creating and drafting these documents for people. And they're just great. I can't say enough about how great trusts are. But the beauty of a trust essentially is, as long as the asset is controlled by the trust, it does not have to go through court. So everything I just talked about is bypassed. And so as a trustee, I control all the assets. I write the checks to my checking account. I can sell my house. I can refinance my house. I have total control, and then the beneficiaries automatically will get their their awards when I pass away, unless I've designated otherwise, and the trustee can immediately take over. The trustees do not need any court authority in order to pay bills, etc. Okay, so I think I basically did this. A revocable trust. It's a document that's a contract for how you want your assets distributed. It works very similar to the will. I leave this to this person, I leave this to this person. But it's really a valuable tool for minors. So I like to use an analogy of a purse for a trust. So imagine I'm wearing a purse. I put in my purse my car keys, my title to my house, my checkbook, my wallet. And while I'm alive and I'm carrying that purse, I could take my checkbook out, write checks, put it back. I have full control of all the assets in that purse. The minute I pass away, essentially, they're just taking the purse off of my hands and giving it to the next person. And now the next person can put on the purse and they have control of everything in there. It's seamless. It's basically that. It's simple. The only time there's an issue is if something didn't make it into the purse. So if I didn't put my car keys in there and my car is not in the purse, then I've given everything to, I've died, someone's taken the purse, someone's now in control of it, and they're saying, wait, we need the car keys. They're carrying my body out to the morgue, and they're like, wait, we need the car keys. They're like, no, sorry, you have to get a court order to touch her body. You can't do that. So then you wind up back in court. So part of the trust process is actually putting the assets in the trust. So that's step 2. But most important for minors is minors cannot inherit. So we like to keep the assets in the trust because that way when something happens, the trustee can manage it for the minor's benefit and then distribute it when they turn 18 or later, which I'll get to in a minute. Otherwise, and we've seen this with life insurance, a lot of times people put the child, of course, as the beneficiary, but children cannot inherit. They cannot receive that check. So then a court case has to be commenced so somebody can get legal guardianship over the assets of the minor. I had a client once, her grandmother left the money to all the grandkids. One of them was 14. Mom had to pay out of her pocket tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to the court in order to get appointed the guardianship for her child. And then her child turned 18. Do you think he just got the money? No, the courts don't work like that. That would be easy. She had to apply for permission to release the money to the child. And while it was there, the court gets involved. They require it to be in a very conservative checking account or savings account. They're not allowed to invest that money at the risk of the court being held responsible for the loss, right? So I'm sure Rob is like, no, I'm investing in that money. Nobody likes that idea. So we definitely want to try to do trusts for inheritance because then the trustee can hold it until the child is of certain age. And again, no court involved. The only thing that we do need with estate planning and minors is naming a guardian through a will. So whenever we do a trust for a client, we also do a will, and in that will, we appoint a guardian. And that says that if I die, I want this person to raise my kids. So that does have to be done in the will. So that partners with the trust. But for the assets, we want to always put them into the trust. And again, naming guardians for kids is really important because you don't know who's going to try to come forward and try to raise your kids, right? You might think, oh, my sister's going to do it. But what if your ex's, niece wants to try to do it too? And you're like, no way, I do not want that person raising my children. You don't have a say anymore. You're dead. So you really want to be able to have that say, put it in writing, nominate short-term and long-term guardians. And what do I mean by that? My preference for a guardian would be my ex's, my children's dad's aunt who lives in Canada. She's great, but she lives in Canada. So if something happens to me and him and those kids are in school, is she going to be able to fly down from Canada and pick them up? No. So what is the school going to do? Are they going to hang out with the kids for an extra day and a half? No, they're going to call it Child Protective Services, and Child Protective Services will literally pick them up and put them in foster care until the aunt can come, which is absolutely not what I would want. But I can appoint temporary guardians, my neighbor who they play with their kids. She can have the authority to pick up the kids, take them and hold them until the aunt can come from Canada. Okay, so these are also another legal document that allows the children to go temporarily with someone until the long-term guardian can come and take them. So I'm going to talk about subtrust. So again, minors cannot inherit. If money is left to a minor, a guardian has to be appointed through the courts. And the other thing we want to mention is, do you want an 18-year-old potentially to receive hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So, you know, I'm sure when I was 18, I would have done well with my money, but not everybody's going to be as 18-year-old savvy. I mean, we've heard terrible stories. You know, the 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old has a girlfriend and she wants a diamond ring, and so they go buy it, or a motorcycle. Nothing against motorcycles, but maybe not for an 18-year-old. So how do we protect this money? Is we leave it in the trust, and the child cannot inherit it or receive it outright until they reach an age or a stage, like graduate college or get married. So the trust is able to do that. The trust is able to give very clear instructions for when the asset can be released. Now, also during that time, money is still spent for the benefit of the children. So we call it the HEMS standard: health, education, maintenance, and support. So if the child needs health care, the trust can pay for it. If the child's going to go to college, the trust can pay for it, right? As long as it's in that standard HEMS, health, education, maintenance, and support, it's, you know, that's what we saved our money for. We want our child to benefit from it. We just don't necessarily want them to spend it in their way. But you can also create a situation where the child is a co-trustee. So then they learn with the trustee that you appointed how to invest and spend their money. So this is an option. It's not for everyone, because again, if there's a dispute with co-trustees, nothing's going to happen. So you really need to speak with an attorney to figure out what's best for your family. All right. So again, we talked about subtrust. It's basically a trust within a trust. The beauty of a subtrust also is if the checks are not written out directly to the child, that means creditors cannot get it. So I don't know, you know, for me, I went to college. When I went to college, the first thing I did was sign up for all these free credit cards because I would get a free bag and a free water bottle. Then I got stuck with paying all those credit card bills, and I'm sure not every child is able to do that. So the creditors cannot come after the trust, okay? But if the money was written out to the minor, they can. And also we've seen situations where somebody inherits the money, they get married, they use that money to buy a house, and then they get divorced. Guess who can go after that money now? The divorcing spouse, because it was commingled as a marital asset. If it was kept in the trust, then the trust could have purchased it. And then if the spouse doesn't work out, the spouse can't go after that money. So, you know, there's a lot of benefits for asset protection. You know, when we talk about generational wealth, long-term wealth, it's by keeping it in that trust, it stays there and protects it. There's also subtrust for special needs. So if there's a special need child, they probably can, even if they can inherit because they have the capacity to, if they're receiving government benefits, they're going to get cut off from those benefits. So by keeping it in the trust, the money can still be spent for their benefit and they can still get the government benefits. I'm telling you guys, this is a good tool out there. So moving on. Oh, okay, I jumped ahead. So that's the special needs, supplemental needs trust. So whenever there's someone with special needs, and this can also work for spouses, parents, you know, sometimes we have mom and dad have a special need, or, you know, they're on disability. Mom doesn't want dad to be disqualified, so she'll leave the money in trust for dad, and then it's used again for his benefit and doesn't get him kicked off of his benefits. I always like to end my stories with some celebrity stories because we can all relate. So I'm going to talk about Heath Ledger and Whitney Houston today. Heath Ledger died in 2008. He was only in his 20s when he died. Now, Heath Ledger did do a will. Go Heath Ledger. But he did it before he had his daughter and before he was with his girlfriend who birthed his daughter. So in his will, he left everything to his parents. So that means that he did not update it when he had a child and then he died. And so the child technically was not a beneficiary of that estate. Everything went to his parents because the will is the will. He had an opportunity to update it and he didn't. So luckily in his case, the parents said, look, we're going to make sure that the daughter gets the money. But this had to go through the court system. I know about it. Anybody can Google it because it went through the public probate court system. And luckily it was resolved, but maybe he would have wanted his girlfriend to get it. She was cut out. She does not get any of that money. So it was unfortunate that Heath Ledger did not update his estate plan. Whitney Houston also did an estate plan, go girl. But so what she did is she did a will with the trust in the will. So again, we know all about it because even though trusts are private, she didn't do it as a standalone trust. She put it in her will, which meant it had to go through the courts and we all have access to the information. Whitney Houston, as you know, was was married to Bobby Brown. Then they got divorced, but they did have a child, Bobby Christina. Whitney Houston died while Bobby Christina was young, but she did inherit a portion of the money when she turned 18. So what Whitney's trust said is that I want everything to go to my daughter. She gets a portion at 18, another portion, 1/3 at 25, and the balance at age 30. So I like this plan. I do this for all of my clients, or I recommend it for all my clients. Give them portions at a time. Bobby Christina, as you may know, died the same fatal death as her mother, drowned in a bathtub with drugs at age 20. So Bobby Christina had received 1/3 of the assets. Where do you think that money went when Bobby Christina died? To her father, because she did not have a will. And we probably don't know what she would have done with it because she had some shady boyfriend at the time. But because she didn't have a will under the state of California, everything went to Bobby Brown. So a big chunk of Whitney Houston's money wound up going to her ex-husband, Bobby Brown, because she did not leave it in the trust and did an outright distribution at age 18. Luckily, she did the other 2/3 at stages, and the will said, if my daughter dies, I want those to go to my sister. So luckily, 2/3 of her estate was preserved for Whitney Houston's siblings, which is what we want, you know, in the event of that scenario. So hopefully you take away from that, you know, the power of a trust and what it can do. This is my contact information. I also want to offer for anybody who's attended, I love to offer, because you took your time on a Thursday evening to listen to us, a bonus. So if you wanted to contact me, we would do an initial consultation. I normally charge $750 for the consultation, but that gets totally waived if you've attended the webinar. So that'll be a bonus for you guys if you want to take me up on it. And otherwise, I'm open to questions. And if you have questions for Rob, we will take questions. And thanks for attending today.
That's very happy to have you guys. And that was awesome, Leslie. I took down some notes myself. So if you guys don't have questions, I certainly have a few myself. I definitely learned a few things. But yes, we thank you guys for attending. I'll extend, you know, the same offer to you guys as well. And I can put up my contact info if anybody needs it. I think a majority of you guys have it. But I have a few unfamiliar faces in here. So I know Prince, I think you work with Leslie, and Lyrica. I don't think we had the pleasure of meeting. So if you do need my contact info, I can put that up there. But I'll offer the same thing, a consultation, and really a 15-minute consultation that just breaks down a little bit more about how you can tangibly do this for your finances. Kind of like I said earlier, knowing about this stuff is fantastic, and especially with Leslie, which he was talking about, knowing what to do with your estate prior to passing away is fantastic. Actually doing that is the important part, because I'm sure Whitney Houston had a great estate planning attorney that, you know, availed her obviously to the benefits of a will, of a trust, but unfortunately she wasn't able to implement everything that she should have. And because of that, that was why Bobby Brown, good old Bobby Brown, ended up with a little bit more than he should have. So I'll extend the same courtesy to you guys. I don't charge anything for an initial consultation. You can ask me as many questions as you'd like. I promise I won't get mad at you, because I'm just as inquisitive as you are. So we open up the floor for some questions if you guys have. You can either drop it in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
And I'm going to turn off the recording now so that the recording won't be, the questions won't be recorded. Thanks, guys.